One of the big advantages of being born in the 2000s when it comes to gaming is that I was way too young or didn't even exist when some of the greatest video games of all time released. And even now in my 20s I get to experience so many classics, due to the sheer amount of remasters or remade games like Final Fantasy VII for example. And even though it is still not available on modern platforms, GTA 4 is the latest game I finally played after all these years. And from the moment the Eastern European migrant Nico Bellic steps from the ship, I got introduced to the dirty, grey and depressing version of New York that Liberty City represents. This roughness is one of the game's best features and helps create its unique atmosphere that I have never seen implemented this well before. And inside this almost depressing environment, typical for Rockstar open worlds, you have an almost ridiculous variety of activities. Beginning with one of the biggest selling points of Grand Theft Auto games, the cars, that range from SUVs and sports cars to stuff like fire trucks or even the forklift. And if you ever played a GTA game before, you know that the cars are essential for anything you do in this game. Unless you want to spend hours walking everywhere. But of course you don't just use them to move from A to B. That part can actually be skipped by calling a cab outside of missions. Instead, there are a huge variety of missions and activities surrounding driving, like going out to take a drink with one of Nico's friends, take part in a street race or flee from a shootout, just to name a few. And for a game where driving is not the only gameplay focus, the driving physics feel incredible, especially for a game from 2008. Also, another detail I noticed is that instead of just the minimap to guide you around, some car models have a speaking navigation system with different voices for certain car brands, which is a level of detail even GTA 5 was missing. And aside from cars, you also have motorcycles, boats, helicopters, a subway, a cable car, and for the fine gentlemen out there, the forklift, to get around Liberty City. But because this is not a video about Gran Turismo, let's get away from the driving instructor dream and talk about the combat for a bit. And here we have to start with one of the aspects of the game that reminded me of its age, and that is the hand-to-hand combat that just looks and feels very clunky. But I feel like Rockstar Games was aware of that when developing that game, and besides some early missions, it's never really used throughout the game. In addition to that, you will get your hand on either a knife or a baseball bat very early on, so using your fists is not going to trouble you very long. And as soon as you get your hands on your first firearm, Grand Theft Auto 4's combat begins to shine. So despite a quite limited selection of guns, with 2 handguns, 2 shotguns, 2 SMGs, 2 assault rifles, 2 sniper rifles and a rocket launcher, in combination with the physics and the goofy AI, just causing havoc outside of missions is just fun. And when it comes to the missions itself, I really like how Nico's story feels more down to earth compared to GTA 5 for example. Which doesn't mean there isn't completely over the top stuff like shooting helicopters with a rocket launcher outside of another helicopter. Another thing I noticed about the missions or combat in general is that the AI was shooting way better than in other Rockstar titles, so I always made sure to buy new armor before each mission. I also found myself being much more careful when approaching enemies in the game, especially when you clear out a building. But anyway, all of these things made the time I spent with GTA 4 fly by like nothing, especially with the attention to detail in aspects that can easily be overlooked. Which brings me to the music and especially the radio. There are a total of 22 different radio stations, with an additional one that can be fully customized by the player. And no matter what you're into, there's literally something for everyone. Ranging from Tough Gong Radio that plays reggae, Liberty Rock Radio that, who would have guessed, plays rock, the Jazz Nation Radio that plays classic jazz from the 1940s to the 1960s, up to the Bloodfire War Hate Show that plays death metal, which adds up to a total of 375 different songs that also contain a lot of quality, with names like Queen, Elton John, Bob Marley and AC/DC, just to name a few. And completed is all of this with a unique host for each station that mostly talk about things related to their station's theme. But in addition to that, there are also dynamic reactions, for example to the weather or the weekly news program that updates depending on your actions throughout the story. Which I again think is crazy when you keep in mind how much of a background element the radio actually is. And when it comes to the open world activities, you are not limited to shooting, driving and listening to the radio. You can go out with one of Nico's mates and get flat out drunk, you can eat at restaurants, you can go bowling, you can go to an internet cafe, log into a dating website and arrange several dates, or if you had yourself enough you can try one of the worst collectible achievements ever, the Flying Rats, where you have to shoot 200 individual pigeons all around Liberty City. So, before we come to the story, I want to give you the chance to skip to the timestamps shown on the screen, if you don't want to get spoiled. With that out of the way, the story of GTA 4 begins, as mentioned before, with Niko Bellic, an Eastern European war veteran, arriving in Liberty City's harbor aboard a cargo ship. He does so for several reasons. For one, his cousin Roman invited him and convinced him that living in America is like living in heaven. But that's not the only reason. He also tries to find the man who betrayed his military unit and caused most of his brothers in arms to be killed. When he actually meets up with Roman, he quickly finds out that his cousin's stories about fast cars and beautiful women were all made up. And he instead lives in a rundown apartment and owns a taxi service that is struggling financially. He even owes money to a loan shark with connections to the Albanian mafia. Niko offers to help Roman, and despite the situation being nothing like he was promised, begins to work for his cousin. During his work, he is introduced to Roman's girlfriend, who also works as his secretary, who then introduces Niko to her friend Michelle, who is this game's first love interest, and also acts as a sort of tutorial for the gameplay mechanics of dating or hanging out with people in general. While working on smaller jobs, Niko sometimes has to defend his cousin from thugs sent by the Albanian mafia, which ultimately results in Niko killing their leader Dadran Petrol when they attack Roman once again. While continuing his work, Niko is introduced to one of Roman's good friends, little Jacob, who is a higher ranking member of the Jamaican gang. The two continue to work together, which mostly means dealing with rivaling gang members. They two end up becoming good friends as well, and Jacob introduces Niko to his first firearm. On a side note, if you continue to help Jacob, aside from the main story and max out his friendship, you get access to a mobile weapon shop, which is really useful if you don't want to drive all across town to restock your firepower. Soon after, Niko meets Vlad, a Russian loan shark, for the first time. Niko agrees to work for Vlad in order to spare Roman from spiraling deeper and deeper into death. Shortly after a mission where Niko is asked to kill Ivan Bichkov, Vlad's business partner that you can actually spare if you want, Niko finds out that our Russian client slept with Mallory and decides he is ready to meet his maker. After transferring Vlad to the Shadow Realm, Niko reveals his plans of getting revenge for his military friend Sir Roman. Not long after, the cousins find themselves in the basement of Vlad's bosses Mikhail Faustin and Dmitry Raskalov. Faustin, despite obviously having a very short fuse, did not kidnap the two to take revenge. He instead asked Niko to work for him directly. Without much of a choice, he accepts and is once again drawn deeper into the criminal underworld. Under Faustin, Niko's work mainly consists of sabotaging and attacking the organization of Kenny Petrovich, who is the most powerful mobster in Liberty City. Dmitry then asks Niko to meet him alone, where he tells him that he has to kill Faustin in order to get Petrovich off of his and his cousin's back. Seeing no other way out, Niko agrees. After doing the deed, Niko is once again asked to meet up with Dmitry at a warehouse to get paid for the job. But Dmitry betrays Niko for a Russian criminal called Ray Bulgarin, who was one of the reasons Niko came to the United States. But thanks to the help of one of the best side characters in Rockstar Games history, little Jacob, Niko manages to escape with his life. But he soon has to realize that it is far from over yet, because Dmitry's men burned down Roman's company and apartment, leaving them no choice but to flee. With nothing left, Mallory steps in to help the cousins by organizing a small apartment in another part of town that belongs to one of her family members. She also introduces Niko to Manny Escuela, a guy that likes to portray himself as a hero that cleans the streets from criminals and even goes as far as filming himself doing so. Niko is ordered to do his dirty work, but the two don't really get along well. But once again, thanks to Mallory, we are introduced to Elisabetta Torres, a Puerto Rican drug lord that appreciates Niko's work and grants him access to further connections in the underworld, like the Irish Mafia or the drug dealer Playboy X. The latter is soon helping Niko out by giving him some work and introducing him to his mentor Dwayne Forge, who was released from prison very recently and needs help getting his act together. Dwayne and Niko even begin to bond over their terrible past and life choices, but eventually Playboy and Dwayne both end up deciding the other has to be taken care of, and both ask Niko to do it, leaving you with a choice. If you take out Dwayne, Playboy pays you, but regrets it very soon and is never seen again. If you take out Playboy, Dwayne and Niko become really good friends, and you gain access to Playboy's penthouse as a hideout. After things have settled down a bit, Niko gets a call from Elisabetta, who is very upset about herself and little Jacob being ripped off in a cocaine deal. Niko retrieves the drugs, but when he arrives at the place he expected to meet little Jacob, he is met by Michelle, Mallory's friend from the beginning of the game instead. She reveals to him that he is part of a government agency that pressures him to do their dirty work, and her real name is actually Karen. After a few jobs that mainly consist of taking care of potential terrorists, the agency promises to clear Nico's criminal record and offers help with finding the man who betrayed his squad. Shortly after, he meets with Elisabetta once more. She tells him that she is going to be arrested soon and begins to panic. Then, at the probably worst time possible, the self-proclaimed city cleaner Manny and his cameraman walk in asking her to stop dealing with drugs. Due to her panic and an unholy amount of drugs in her blood, the two men find their end through Elisabetta's gun. Nico is then asked to get rid of the bodies, which he does, and then never visits her again. Later in the game you may overhear some news in the radio that reveal her arrest and that she is facing 300 years in jail. In the meantime, Roman seems to have disappeared and Mallory calls Nico telling him that Dimitri has kidnapped him. Nico manages to retrieve him and things actually seem to get better for a change. Because Roman's insurance grants him a huge sum for his burnt down property and he is able to buy a huge new apartment and restart his taxi business. But the peace doesn't last very long as Nico is blackmailed by a corrupt cop named Francis while he begins to work for the Irish Mafia. Francis wants Nico to assassinate witnesses that would get himself into trouble. For the Irish guys on the other hand, he helps with several robberies, ultimately ending with a bank robbery. After the heist, the Irish introduce Nico to further members of their family. For one, Derek McCreary, who asked Nico to take care of some problems from his past haunting him till this day. And the head of the Irish Mafia, Gerald McCreary, who tasked Nico with sabotaging the relations between the Albanians and the Ancelotti family. During that time, he deepens the friendship to Patrick and gets introduced to his sister Kate, who is another possible love interest. Coming back to our morally grey police officer Francis, who heard about Derek returning to Liberty City, and because he feels that he might be in possession of evidence that could ruin his life, asked Nico to kill him. But because Derek knows about Francis' plans and asked Nico to protect him, you are once again left with the choice of who you take out. If you decide to help Derek, Nico simply ends up cutting all ties with him afterwards. If you help Francis, Nico uses his information to blackmail Francis himself, to get the police off of him whenever he needs it. Shortly after, Nico will begin working for the head of the Pegorino family, Ray Bocchino, that was once again introduced to him by Patrick. Bocchino asked Nico to assist his men with collecting and dealing with diamonds. To do so, they first have to collect the diamonds that are hidden inside trash bags, disguised as trash men. However, Bocchino's men decide to betray him, leaving Nico with no choice but to take them out. He then tries to sell the diamonds with the help of Johnny Klebitz, but they get ambushed and Johnny takes off with the money, betraying Bocchino as well. After taking some more jobs for Bocchino, he helps tracking down Florian Kravich, one of the two remaining members of his military squad. Roman and Nico decide to confront him, but they learn that he is not the traitor, and instead has come out as gay and is living a completely different life now under the name Bernie Crane. Before they leave him be for good, Nico protects Bernie from a homophobic man and later even from Dimitri's thugs on several occasions. Another person Nico gets to know is the Don of the Gambetti family, the most powerful Italian mafia organization. He is once again assigned several jobs, which this time mostly consist of taking out Dimitri's men. As a reward, the head of the Gambetti family promises to help Nico get his hands on Darko Brevic. Shortly after helping one mafia family, he is contacted once more by another in the form of Ray Bocchino, who introduces him to another contract, Phil Bell, who later introduces Nico to his boss Jimmy Pegorino. During his work for Pegorini, he mainly has to take hits on other Italian families. But everything goes south when Pegorino gets progressively more paranoid due to his bodyguard turning out to be a government agent. But Nico does not have a lot of time thinking about Pegorino, because he's asked to meet Gerald McCreary in prison. Gerald then tells Nico to help Patrick kidnap Giovanni Ancelotti's daughter, because they heard that the Ancelotti family is now in possession of the diamonds from earlier in the story. Nico tracks down Ancelotti's daughter Gracie, and Patrick organizes an exchange that is once again ambushed, this time by Ray Bulgarin. After a shootout, one of Bulgarin's men throws the bag of diamonds into a garbage truck, causing them to be lost forever. Following this incident, Nico is called and informed that Darko Brevic was tracked down and is being brought to the airport. Roman and Nico take off to the airport and finally find the men that betrayed Nico and his friends. In a final cutscene where Darko reveals that he betrayed them for just $1,000, you are given a final choice: to kill him or to let him go. First of all, welcome back to everyone skipping the story section. So while GTA 4 might have some issues like not having checkpoints inside missions or clunky melee combat, despite these issues, this game has a lot to offer that modern games still could learn a lot from. Especially when it comes to the attention to detail like the radio, for example. And to top it off, You get the amazing story of the Eastern European war veteran and immigrant Nico Bellic, who came to America with his own goals, dreams and hopes, just for everything to spiral downwards the moment he sets foot on solid ground. So if you're like me and have several educational gaps when it comes to video games, this is one you have to close as soon as possible. And if you watch until now, first of all, thank you for that. If you have the time, please tell me your opinion on the game or the video in the comments. If you liked what you saw, maybe consider liking and subscribing. And I hope to see you next time.